Welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to do homegrown tomato salsa. It took me only brief 7 months to make that tomato salsa, although most of that time was spent on growing the tomatoes. I seeded the tomatoes at the beginning of the April and I transplanted them in pots about 3 weeks later. Planted them out in the greenhouse into the ground at the very end of the May, which was a bit late for them, but we have been on holidays and that just when I had time to do it. It didn't, I think, make huge difference because the summer was so cold and just sad in Scotland this year that it just really took them very, very long to get into the fruiting season. So the first harvest for us was starting just in September. So I grew 14 different types of tomatoes, but only 3 larger beefsteak style tomatoes. The first one was the Rose de Berne, which was quite large, rounded fruits, a bit more on the pinker side. This one is called Costoluto, and I have grew it this second year round because the tomatoes are quite large, but honestly I'm not going to grow them again because they are ripped. I find it very, very hard to get the skin out of them, but the huge one I'm holding right now in a hand is called Feo de Rio Gordo, and this is definitely my winner because they are so huge. Some of them were half kilo and they are not as ripped as the Costoluto, so they're really easy to blanch and take the skin off because the Costoluto I found really hard. There are also some of my homegrown onions. If I add the time of growing onions, it will be more than 7 months because they are started much earlier in the year. Once I removed all the skins from the onions, they were all ready for chopping. And because they were all various sizes, I end up cutting some of them into smaller pieces. Katie did most of the chopping. Katie is our food processor. And yes, I do name all our kitchen appliances. The recipe I use, it doesn't really matter whether you use red or white onions. I just have had red onions from my own garden and some small white onions as well, so it's a bit of a mixture of both. In order to get all the tomatoes ready for the salsa, you need to first remove the skin. So the easiest way to do it is to cut the small cross on the top of the tomato and blanch it in boiling water. Ideally you want to use large beefsteak tomatoes because they are just simply easier to blanch and to prep. But I do use as well smaller tomatoes because of the harvest I get. I have to use whatever I have at a given time. Some of the tomatoes at the time of harvesting were actually not fully ripened, but the tomatoes, once they have a bit of a blush color on them, they start slightly getting rosy. You can bring them in room temperature and they will ripen at home. Once you cut the cross on the top of the tomato, you need to put them in a boiling water just for a few seconds. Depending on the size of the tomato, it might be 5 to 30 seconds. Some of the varieties will blanch faster and some of them need a bit more time, depending obviously on the size as well. Once you see the skin start slightly peeling off a bit, then you can just take it off and put in a bowl of ice cold water. And then the skin slides from the tomato very easily. While we are on the subject of tomatoes, there's a few fun facts about them. They have a high concentration of lysophene, which is the antioxidant linked to their bright red color. Lysophene is actually linked to reduced risk of the cancer especially prostate, lung and stomach cancer, but as well other diseases, because lycopene is an antioxidant which helps to reduce the amount of free radicals in the body. Therefore, it helps to reduce the amount of oxidative stress. Tomatoes are also high in vitamin C, which does increase your immunity, so that's all great and amazing. But the interesting thing is that actually tomatoes are one of those vegetables which does increase the amount of antioxidants, therefore increases the amount of lycopene while they are being cooked, as opposed to eaten raw. I won't lie, I can be a purist sometimes, and I do like to dice my old tomatoes for the salsa by hand. I do it as well because I do like the chunky tomatoes and do like the texture of the cubes in the tomatoes. This yellow tomato you see me chopping here is actually called orange banana. I guess it makes it orange. They do get a bit more orange tint to them when they're growing. And I must say this has been really quite productive tomatoes. I'm definitely going to grow it again. And this is the Feo de Rio Gordo. This is absolute winner. Look at the size of this tomato. It has had about half kilogram, just one tomato, and I had a few of them like that, so it just makes it so much easier if you need to prep. This is labor of love. The prep does take some time, but I do really like making my own natural foods, and this is one of those things which I can make in decent quantity with growing tomatoes here in Scotland. As I mentioned before, the summer was really quite poor and cold and sad, and it wasn't really good, and Scotland already is not the best place to grow tomatoes. So generally I do try to make some salsa for us, and I do make it really mild because I have kids which are quite young. My daughters are 2 years old and 3.5. They are not really into spicy salsa, so I make it myself. I control what goes into it. I know there's no emulsifiers, no preservatives, nothing really strange. I pasteurize it, and I know this is a decent fast food for us to have. So you're going to see two recipes I'm going to make in this video. It's actually 2 different batches for the salsa. The first one I'm making here, it's called zesty salsa. I will link the recipe below. And I modified it slightly because I made it last few years, and I always find that there is a bit too much juice between the dices, as it feels a bit watery. So I added the salt ahead of time to get the juices release a bit and strain a bit over the cheesecloth, so I'm able to get a bit less juicy diced tomatoes. And I'm measuring them all just so I know the quantities for the recipe. So I have got all my tomatoes and onions chopped. Did I mention that I can be sometimes a purist? Well, I also dyed all the peppers by hand. I just really like those uniform, nice, lovely dices, which you cannot get with any food processor. And actually have attempted trying some with food processor. You will see the yellow stuff in the pot was actually some of the yellow peppers I did in a food processor. I found that they released far too much juice, and I just kind of, I don't know, I was not too keen on it. I seriously may try it when my life gets completely mad, although it feels sometimes quite busy with kids anyway. But somehow I still like just putting that work when you just find some time to do some dicing. I find it meditative when I have time to do it, and I don't stress over doing it really fast. And it's just, I don't know, it feels like a quality product. It feels like love being put into it because I spend that time dicing it all. It's just different. It feels different to me anyway. I do get that not everyone can be bothered. You know, everyone has different things that are important to them. So, you know, if you go and blend it all in a blender and you're happy with it, just go for it. Seriously, I may try it someday too. Fun health facts about bell peppers is that they are also high in vitamin C, similar to tomatoes, so again great for your immunity, but they are also containing lycopene, same as tomatoes. The red color in them is the lycopene, which is the antioxidant, has anti-cancer properties, and also as in tomatoes, that amount of lycopene increases while cooking. For the record, I did not grow those peppers. I bought them in supermarket. The yellow ones in the pot you see, those are actually the ones I grew myself. They actually have been called chocolate bell pepper, something like that. They had a bit brown skin outside and yellow inside. But the reality is that I have tried growing peppers now quite a few years, and I just don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know when I'm going to give up. I feel like I keep trying. I thought this year will be the year. I did have a bit better success than normally because I have had some peppers, but it's just sad. For those of you that like really spicy salsa, well, I don't. I mean, I can take some spice, but my kids cannot take any spice, so this is very mild. I just use a few really mild chili peppers without the seeds, and that's it. And the quantities of hot peppers in the recipe I just replace with the regular sweet peppers because that doesn't really affect the acidity of the recipe. By the way, if you like the video and you like the content, please click the like button. It really helps my channel to grow. And here's actually next day. This salsa took longer than one day. I have two small kids, they needed me, and so I have put all the chopped stuff in the fridge and resumed the next day. So this is me just chopping extra coriander to add to the recipe. So as I mentioned in the title, this is the oven method for the salsa. So what I do is I put my jars into the oven at 110 Celsius degrees and I keep them hot until I'm ready to jar. Finally, the moment to put it all together, mix all the ingredients and get it heat up for canning. So I added the coriander and some garlic puree, and then as well some apple cider vinegar. So you can, as I said before, you can find the link in the description to the recipe. In my opinion, that recipe does not have enough salt, so it does need some extra salt added. I would recommend at least double the salt. I thought, you know, maybe go with the base recipe and then figure out what you like. So you need to give it a good mix to all the ingredients, make sure that everything is well incorporated together, and then it's time to move it to the pot before heating up. So the key to the oven canning or oven pasteurization is that you do need to heat up the mixture, and it does have to be at the boiling point, or it has to be really, really hot. All ready to heat up. I really try to put it all in one pot just to realize that it's not going to be very easy to stir it, so I split the salsa between 2 large pots. Okay, this is going to be the boring part where the pot boils and we just stir at it. So I'm going to take you to my second salsa, which I did on some other occasion from this year's harvest as well. This salsa is slightly different. I will also link in the description. It's called homemade tomato salsa. What I like about this recipe, and is becoming actually our family favorite, is that it adds tomato puree to it. And I somehow like it because it feels like it has that deeper, richer flavor. The other one is truly zesty salsa. It's quite light, but this tomato salsa, it just kind of feels richer. What I did with this one is, yet again, I made it very mild, so there's no any chili added to this. It also uses ground cumin, which I think is another reason why the flavor profile is quite nice in this one. And obviously this has, I think, the right quantities of salt. Additionally as well, I should mention that I think because we add tomato puree to it, it kind of almost thickens a bit the juices from tomatoes. It doesn't feel so watery. So the second salsa is hot, ready for jarring. I take my jars straight from the oven while they are really hot, and then I start pouring the hot salsa straight into the hot jars. This is quite important because if you put hot salsa in a cold jar, they're going to break, or there's a chance of breaking. And obviously if you put cold salsa in a hot jar, the same thing may happen. The other reason for doing this is as well that you want to move it to the oven quite fast after the sauce is being put in the jars, once you put the lids on, because this just shortens the time they need to spend in the oven and gives you a bit better indication of how long it actually needs there. Because if the jar is about 100 degrees of Celsius and the pot is boiling, then they are almost at boiling temperature, so really then you're reducing the pasteurization time. If you would were to put much cooler jars into the oven, you will need to lower the temperature and then let it increase slowly, what would then increase your pasteurization time. What I have done with this batch is that I put half of this mixture into the jars without adding any spice, and then I have loads of small jars, added some Tabasco to it. So this is to make smaller batches, smaller jars of spicy salsa, which me and my husband can have alongside the non-spicy salsa we have with our kids, if that makes sense. But I will tell you, I am a weakling when it comes to chili or to stuff. My threshold is quite low, so this is still probably very, very mild for most people, but it's great for us. We like some spice sometimes, so that's why I do it. Those jars are very small, and again we repeat the same thing: hot jars, hot salsa, fairly quick pouring, and then I clean them up and they go back into the oven. If you need new to canning, I just explained that what I mean by cleaning the jars. You need to take a very, very clean, slightly damp cloth and wipe around the whole rim. Make sure that there's nothing on the on the surfaces which touch the lid of the tomato salsa or any products you're pasteurizing, because that's where the seal may not work, or where the germs will develop, and that's how can spoil the batch. Once all the lids are on and everything was clean, I put the jars back in the oven. Bear in mind the oven is still on all the time, so I have not switched the oven. The oven is at the temperature of around 110 degrees Celsius, and I do set it up for about 35 minutes. Back to the zesty salsa number 1. So the process here will be the same: hot salsa, hot jars, hot oven. And again, you pour the hot salsa straight into the hot jar, as I said. And of course, we need to make sure that the rims of the jars are clean. So we wipe it clean, make sure that there's nothing there, no juice, no tomatoes, so the jars can pasteurize well. And after that, we put the lids, and we do put this back in the oven. So the jars are hot, the salsa is hot in the jars, and we put them back in the hot oven at least 110 degrees Celsius. With these jars, which are much bigger, I would keep it for about 45 minutes for pasteurization. It really doesn't make that huge difference. I tell you, I have done this before quite a few times, and it just varies. I go on the side of slightly longer. I want to make sure that they're well pasteurized, and it as I said, the tomatoes and peppers are actually healthier for us when they're cooked a bit longer. So with this, actually, it doesn't really matter if they are in the oven for a bit longer. What I do afterwards, which is really important, is the best thing is not to move them directly after the time of pasteurization finishes. So just leave it out in the oven to cool down by itself naturally. I have took them out later in the evening when they were already cooled down, and put them on some kitchen towel so they could just rest there until I had time to label them. Once I had the all jars labeled, I do move them into our storage. So I do have utility room in our house, quite a small one, where I keep a few things which we use regularly at hand, and once they are out, we bring extras from garage. And I don't have cellar, I don't have huge utilities, I don't have special rooms for it. All we do is just we have some shelving in a garage where we store all our produce. I do hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like the video, comment below, let me know what you think, and subscribe if you want to hear more from me about unprocessed, natural, simple living.